Hey guys, welcome back to Apologetics 101. My name is Grant, and today we are talking about the problem of evil. Now, I know I'm a little late on the game, but for a movie that's so often quoted, I think Austin Powers could have done a little better on the main villain. All right, let that one sink in, or you may just be too young to get that one at all. Anyway, don't worry about it. Today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. Over the past few videos, we've been giving arguments for God, for the existence of God in general, and then for the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and then also for the veracity of the Bible. In this one, we are going to be responding to an argument against the existence of God, or at least the existence of any recognizable God that we would understand from the Bible. So this argument is called the problem of evil, and you've almost surely heard of something like this before. So the way the official argument goes is like this. Premise 1, if an all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good God exists, then evil cannot exist. Premise 2, evil does exist. Therefore, conclusion, God does not exist. Now, again, you're going to hear different versions of these, and I know if there are any atheists out there, you might be feeling that I gave sort of the weakest version. I don't know. I tried to find the one that I felt was the strongest, but there was a guy named Epicurus who kind of gave the origin of this argument, and he said it like this. If God is willing to prevent evil but unable, he is not all-powerful. If God is able to prevent evil but does not, he is not all good. And if he is both willing and able, how then can evil exist? Now, this argument is built around, so it may sound really good at first, right? Because we all, it's another one of those arguments that really hits you in your heart. We all understand the problem of evil and question how could evil exist, right? But there's a few assumptions to this question and to this argument that I think we need to explore before we move forward with it. So the first is that if God is all-powerful, then he could create a world without evil. Now, this seems straightforward enough, right? It seems like, yeah, if God is all-powerful, then he could somehow, some way, create a world without evil. Well, not so fast. See, if something is outside of the logical realm or the realm of logic, then an amount of power is not actually the question. Here's what I mean. There are simply things that are illogical. So for instance, you might recall the classic question that you probably heard in like middle school or high school or even like a YouTube comment section that says, if God can do anything, can he make a burrito so hot that even he can't eat it, right? Or you might have heard, can he make a rock so heavy that he can't lift it? So this question sets up a question that's not really about power, but really about logic. If you can do anything, can you yourself create something that you cannot do? And so it creates sort of a logical trap, right? Because if you say, yes, he could create that burrito or that rock, well, then now he has something that he can't do, so he's not all powerful. Or if you say, well, no, he can't, well, then the assumption is, well, there's something he can't do, and so he's not all powerful. And so to be clear, there are actually things that God cannot do, but it's not a question of power. It's simply a question of logic, right? So one example is that God could not create a married bachelor, simply because it's a confliction of terms. In that same way, there are certain things in certain worlds which having a lack of evil simply is not plausible because of something like freedom of choice, okay? So God cannot create free slaves. That is, people who are compelled to do what he wants them to do freely. It's simply a contradiction of terms. So if God wants a world in which we are free creatures, able to make free choices that thwart his will and his desires, then they are able to do that which is evil. Which brings us to the second assumption that this question has built in it, that if God was all good, that he would want to create a world without evil. Now, this also seems obvious at first glance, that if God is all good, then of course he would want to create a world that has no evil or suffering in it. But the fact of the matter is that God can be all good and still not share our values. So for instance, God may value free will of his creatures over a lack of evil or suffering. God might understand freedom to be a greater good than a lack of evil or suffering. Now, we might disagree, but it is not logically inconsistent that God could have values that are different from ours, and that they are not a detriment to his goodness. So it's important to point out that you don't actually have to prove this case to prove the argument wrong. You simply have to prove that it could be the case, that there is no logical inconsistency with God being all good and a world existing with evil and suffering. What I mean is you don't have to prove that God does value freedom over lack of evil. You don't have to prove that that is what God desires. You just have to prove that it is not logically inconsistent for God to be all good and all powerful and evil still to exist. Now, this was a quick one, but thank you for watching, and remember, like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.